Greetings. Persia emerged as a state in the 6th century BC when the founder of the Persian monarchy, Cyrus the Great, conquered all of Western Asia and the eastern part of the Iranian world, laying the foundation for the Achaemenid Empire, named after the founder of the dynasty. Successors to Cyrus annexed Babylon, Egypt, states of Anatolia, and the Middle East, transforming Persia into a vast world power. The Persian army was composed of units provided by satraps of provinces and the so-called Immortals, who were directly subordinate to the king himself. The entire army consisted of large divisions of 10,000 men, which were further divided into thousands, hundreds, and tens. The main types of troops included chariots, cavalry, infantry, and the navy. Chariots were utilized even before the Persians. A chariot's crew typically consisted of a driver and one or two warriors armed with bows, javelins, or long spears. The archers in chariots would shoot at enemy warriors, and then the chariot could ram into the already disrupted enemy troops. Cyrus the Great radically reorganized this type of troops. He armored the charioteers with cuirasses that covered everything except their eyes. But most importantly, he instructed attaching iron scythes to the axles on both sides of the wheels, each about a meter long, and other scythes under the axle, pointing downward into the ground, so the charioteers could drive the chariots straight into the enemies. A scythed chariot was drawn by 4 horses and had a crew of up to 3 people, 1 driver and 2 warriors. Now chariots were used to break through the enemy's battle line, followed by its fragmentation. Before describing the Persian cavalry, let me remind you that prior to the invention of stirrups and spurs, cavalry couldn't strike effectively at full gallop, utilizing the horse's momentum, as a spear strike at full gallop invariably caused the rider to fall off due to the recoil of the spear. Therefore, the primary mode of engagement for cavalry was to shoot at the enemy army with bows and throw javelins. And when closing in on the enemy, the Persian horsemen would stab the enemy with a spear, relying solely on their own efforts. Persian cavalry even lacked saddles, using instead a sort of leather pad resembling them. As a result, the main weapons of the cavalry were bows, javelins, and spears, usually 1 javelin and 1 spear. Initially, cavalry had no defensive armor. However, during the Greco-Persian Wars, the Persian leadership realized the necessity of creating heavy cavalry, and riders were provided with armor. In the image, you can see a Persian cavalryman in armor. He is wearing a linen cuirass and trousers with attached metal scales. Some cavalrymen used not horses, but war camels. The main branch of troops in the Persian army was infantry. Infantrymen were divided into slingers, archers, and spearmen. Archers used a composite recurve bow, which had a wooden core with horn strips glued to the back and reinforced with tendons. Unlike the relatively small cavalry bow, the infantry bow was much larger, about 1.5 meters in size. During shooting, infantrymen would draw the string by stepping on the lower part of the bow with their left foot. Arrows were made from reed or cane. They could penetrate shields and armor. The primary unit of troop formation was a 10 called a dathabam. Each dathabam deployed into a small column led by a dathapates, a leader of 10. He held a shield, a spara, which was a rectangular piece of leather stretched over a woven base of wicker. Such a shield covered the body from shoulder to ankle. The dathapates was armed with a spear approximately 1 meter and 80 centimeters long. Behind the Dathapatis stood the warriors of his division, armed with bows. Thus, the front line of the Persian army consisted of one row of spearmen, shielded by large shields, and 9 rows of archers. Since 9 rows of archers could not all shoot accurately at the same time, the shooting was indirect, in a high trajectory, similar to what was shown in the old movie 300 Spartans. Several dozens, grouped into hundreds, formed a formation called a spara. Often behind, or to the side of the spara, stood several rows of spearmen, protected by shields of a different shape. These could be the so-called violin-shaped shields, named for their oval shape with round cutouts on both sides. The outer and inner surfaces of these shields were smooth, indicating that they were most likely made of wood covered with leather. Shields similar in function to the violin-shaped shield were the peltasts, which the Persians borrowed from the Greeks. These shields, with their shape resembling a crescent moon with a decorative cutout, served the same purpose. The spear was shorter than the Greek one, approximately 180 centimeters. The other end of the spear was pointed to stick it into the ground for shooting from a bow. As additional weapons, the Persians used battle axes, swords, and daggers. The battle axe, called sagaris, had a long, slender handle with a heavy cutting or striking blade or point. The sagaris was light enough to be effectively wielded with one hand, but capable of penetrating metal helmets or armor. The battle axe was used by both infantrymen and cavalrymen. Illustrations depict a cavalryman and an infantryman with a battle axe. The primary type of sword was the Achaemenids, evidently borrowed from the Scythians. It was a short sword measuring 45 centimeters in length. The Achaemenids could deliver both thrusting and slashing blows. In addition to the Achaemenids, the Persians also used the kopis, a sword with a single-edged blade on the left side, intended for slashing blows. The kopis was also used by the Greeks, and it's difficult to determine definitively who borrowed this weapon from whom, whether the Greeks from the Persians or vice versa. Persian warriors wore scale or linen armor. The scales had a diameter of about 29 centimeters and a thickness of approximately 11.5 millimeters. The scales were cut with scissors from metal sheets and then sewn onto a fabric or leather base. Their heads were protected by metal helmets worn under soft felt tiaras to shield from sunlight. The elite part of the Persian army consisted of the so-called Immortals, numbering 10,000 in the Persian army. The first 1,000 Immortals formed the personal guard of the king and were exclusively composed of members of the Persian aristocracy. According to one version, the name Immortals originated because Herodotus confused the Persian terms comrades and immortals. Another version explains the origin of the name by the fact that whenever one of the immortals died, they were immediately replaced by another, thus maintaining the number of immortals constant. They were armed just like other infantrymen, with only their weapons and clothing distinguished by rich decoration, often made of gold. Additionally, the spear of each Dathapatis of the Immortals was adorned with a golden pomegranate placed at the end of the spear opposite the blade for balance. For the rest of the members of his unit, these pomegranates were silver. Like the fighters of many professional armies, Persian warriors possessed a strong sense of corporate spirit and a clear understanding of military honor. Therefore, in many battles, they fought very tenaciously, a fact noted even by Herodotus, which was not easy for a Greek who looked down upon barbarians. During the Greco-Persian Wars, the Persians introduced heavily armed warriors, essentially imitations of Greek hoplites known as cardaces. However, they failed to make these formations as effective as the hoplites. The Persians abandoned their experiments and simply began hiring Greek hoplites, who in some cases constituted a significant portion of the Persian army. In addition to Persians and Medes, the Persian army was composed of subject peoples, each of these military units employing its own traditional weapons, formation, and tactics. Apparently, many of these units included archers. The illustration depicts a stele showing representatives of the peoples inhabiting the Persian Empire, many of them with their national units and weapons. The army included engineers capable of constructing pontoon bridges across water obstacles, aiding in city sieges, or erecting tent camps. Reconnaissance was organized, and messengers were used for communication. A weakness of the army was the vast supply trains, which transported not only the necessary supplies for the army, but also many luxuries, including concubines of Persian commanders. A significant role was played by a fleet of biremes, triremes, and pentaconters, primarily based in Tyre and Sidon. The total number of ships reached 400. The main part of the fleet was supplied by Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Anatolian Greeks, and the vessels were manned by corresponding crews. To prevent desertion in battle, each ship was accompanied by 30 Persian marines. Finally, like any respectable army, the Persian army used military standards and symbols. The distinguishing emblem of the Achaemenid army was a standard depicting a golden eagle with spread wings. The Achaemenid Persian state lasted until the Macedonian conquest in 330 BC. After Alexander's death, several Hellenistic states were established on the ruins of the Achaemenid Empire. Goodbye.